I now give the floor to my good friend, Mr. George Tsereteli, the President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you very much, dear Ingeborg, Minister Lajcik, Secretary General Greminger, again, dear Director Gisladotir, dear Ambassador Zanir, dear Mr. Desir, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and of course it was a pleasure to hear President Wałęsa's inspirational remarks. So Polish minister spoke today. It's my pleasure again and honor to be here to speak on behalf of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. I think we have to admit that more than 4 decades after Helsinki final act, the struggle to respect and promote human rights and human security continues to be such a challenge. I think if we're honest, we would have to acknowledge that the past decade has represented a downward trend. This requires increased dedication and focus by all of us in this room. Let me echo previous speakers in thanking the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and of course Slovak chairmanship, for organizing this very important annual event in spite of continued disagreements in Vienna regarding this meeting. The consensus rule, and I've mentioned it many times during our different forums and meetings, which embodies the inclusiveness of our organization, has been the basis of OSCE's strength. We cannot allow it to become its weakness. Consensus should not stand in the way of strong and principled activities and decisions. We know that participation by civil society in OSCE meetings has been the subject of much discussion in recent years. This has also been the case within the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. At our flagship annual session in Luxembourg, we have addressed the square on. We have called our participating states to allow the chairman in office, in consultation with the Troika, as well as relevant OSCE institutions, the decision and discretion to rule on the validity of claims by representatives of participating states that an individual or non-governmental organization seeking to participate in an official OSCE event resorts to the use of violence or publicly condones terrorism or use of violence. We need to encourage greater civil society engagement in all OSCE activities. For the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, this has, for example, meant facilitating side events during our meetings, in addition to regular consultations when we have traveled to different countries and observe elections. These have often been inspiring opportunities to instill some grassroots energy in our work. We must do as much as we can to engage directly with civil society, not stifle their voices. As Chairman in Office Lajcik very rightly underlined earlier this year, dialogue, tolerance, and respect for cultural diversity and human rights are not just good for humanity, but can also act as key drivers of peace. While the OSCE has long acknowledged the need for stronger engagement with civil society, we have ourselves not always followed through on making this engagement sustained and effective. To remedy this as a new initiative, and there will be also some other initiatives I will share with you, I have asked Ms. Pia Kauma, she's here with us, an experienced member of parliament from Finland, to serve as special representative on civil society. And it's happening first time. We've never had a special representative in this field. And work to identify concrete ways to enhance our cooperation to advance OSCE values for the benefit of the people we serve. Our Luxembourg Declaration, for instance, urges participating states to open sessions of the Permanent Council to public observation, including through live streaming on the internet. We're convinced that such efforts will not only contribute to hold participant states accountable for their policies, but also will demonstrate the continued relevance of multilateral engagement on human rights topics. Of course, more public interaction with NGOs will inevitably include criticism of certain OSCE countries. But we need to bear in mind that much like demonstrations and protests we can observe throughout the OSCE area, These are not foreign plots to attempts to undermine a government. Above all, these protests sometimes represent failure to be responsive to the concerns, needs and aspirations of our people. Because many countries of the OSCE region remain far from fully implementing our human dimension commitments, we need to encourage an open dialogue on controversial issues and between opposing voices. Ladies and gentlemen, the human rights dimension and human dimension is a central part of our work in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and we are proud to be able to offer a robust contribution also at this meeting. To strengthen our work here at HDIM and our overall engagement with civil society, the chair of the OSCE's Human Rights Committee, Mr. Hadjivanis, will tomorrow be hosting a side event to open a dialogue and on OSCE priorities and work. The stronger engagement here in Warsaw has been reflected on the field and in our discussions over the past 12 months. Our Human Rights Committee has been extremely active working to shed light on the dire humanitarian consequences of the conflict in Ukraine. Our parliamentary field visits have been instrumental to relay on the urgent need for a sustained ceasefire and increase the mining activities in eastern Ukraine to put an end to the suffering of innocent civilians. We must continue to pursue the implementation of specific measures to facilitate freedom of movement along the contact line for civilians and encourage humanitarian gestures of goodwill, such as prisoner exchanges, in order to enhance the prospects for a political solution of the conflict. Of course, Ukraine is not the only OSCE country in which populations are suffering under conflict and occupation. We will also be familiar with the situation in my home country of Georgia, where so-called borderization and discrimination by the occupiers make daily life more and more difficult for a large part of Georgian population. In recognition of such challenges in several countries, the OSCE recently called for a particular focus on the human rights of people in and affected by conflict areas and occupied territories. Our ad hoc committees on countering terrorism and on migration have continued to be active by conducting field visits, reaching out to international partners, and raising vital issues in national parliaments. This has contributed to replicate best practices and develop sound policies both for the short and long term. Distinguished guests, OSCE parliamentarians have continued to actively observe elections throughout our region to promote effective institutions. We continue to enjoy ever closer relations with our partners from the ODIHR, both at the leadership and staff level. The proliferation of unprofessional and biased election monitoring, often promoted by host governments and national parliaments, has in recent years had the unfortunate consequence on undermining public trust in election observation overall. We have continue to work hand in hand with Director Gisladotir and her team, as well as with our traditional partners in the European Parliament, the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly to enhance the high value of the OSCE's election observation activities. Our organization possesses the unique asset recognized throughout the world. We must do all that we can to safeguard it. With that said, our practices are not immune to some criticism, and we have remained open to suggestions. In the past year, I'm proud that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly reviewed the election observation practices to preserve the overall credibility of this exercise. Dear friends, dear colleagues, in times of increased polarization in our societies and our political discourse, we have seen more aggressive verbal attacks against activists and politicians online and the real world, sometimes with tragic implications. A fully functioning democracy requires that politicians, officials, and activists to be able to work without fear for their lives, nor fear of being imprisoned for their beliefs. Attacks on politicians or civil society representatives are nothing less than an attack on democracy. This is why it is so important that any political attack be investigated thoroughly, independently, and transparently. The investigation into the murder of Boris Nemtsov 4 years ago has left many questions unanswered. Based on a call by our Assembly members and Russian civil society representatives, for instance, Free Russia Foundation and others, I tasked Vice President Margareta Cederfeld from Sweden to carry out a report on the investigation. I believe it's important that we continue to raise the issue, not only for the memory of Boris Nemtsov and for his loved ones, but also to further guarantee the safety of politicians, lawmakers, and all those fighting daily to promote democracy and the rule of law. Everybody in this room will also recognize the need to protect those fighting against corruption. This is a scourge impacting all of our societies and undermines everything we try to achieve. In order to contribute to anti-corruption efforts and to consider how to protect those who are involved in this vital pursuit, I'm pleased to have recently appointed another my colleague from Cyprus, Serena Karambidis, to lead OSCE PA contributions as my special representative. The difficult situation of journalists has also been a focus for OSCE parliamentarians. Noting the particular sensitivity of attacks against journalists, the OSCE PA recently called for effective parliamentary oversight of government actions on all cases of journalist murders, their imprisonment or ill treatment. Of course, this is only aspect of the challenges facing journalists. We have seen in many countries a narrowing space for critical opinions in the media, even when done under the cover of technically legal actions. This stifling of freedom of expression is an unacceptable trend that requires dedicated attention. I would like to underline the excellent work conducted by OSCE representative of freedom of media in countering the challenges. The search for truth also compels us to counter the dissemination or disinformation and propaganda that continues to pollute the media environment, polarize politics, and erode public confidence. To complement also the work of Harlem Desir in this particular challenge, I appointed last month Luca Santolini from San Marino as special rapporteur on this issue, that we can also identify more synergies in this field.